Sorry, my dog's going a little crazy. I had to pause it for a moment. Um, Anyways, I guess what I was going to say is that the best teachers do use a combination of both approaches. This is We've seen this in other areas too. Whenever there's like kind of two opposing approaches, there's always a theory or an idea that comes in between the other two. Um, there was when we looked at language learning, there was the language acquisition device idea that it's mainly biology that leads to us having language. And then there was the behaviorist that said it's all about environment and learning. And then, there was an interactionist approach that came out in between the two. Similarly, there was the whole language approach to reading versus the phonics approach. And I mentioned then that the best teachers use both approaches. There's an answer in between. And it's the same thing here. You do maximize time when you do a direct instruction approach, and you can be more sure, at least, of what the children are learning. The constructivist approach, it's nice. If a child does learn something on their own, it tends to be longer lasting and a deeper type of learning. But sometimes with a constructivist approach, the children don't always learn what you're hoping they do. So there's advantages and drawbacks of both. And if you combine them, then those that learn better from one approach or another can benefit in your classroom if you offer both types of approaches. Okay, going on here. Since 1990s or so, the U.S. public and the U.S. government at various levels, whether it's state government or the federal government or smaller governments, I mean, they've demanded more accountability from schools. Are schools really teaching our children what we think they are? Are they doing an adequate job, or are they just pushing students through? And so this some of this came from our slipping in national rankings. We'll see some of this. I'll talk about this a little bit later, but we weren't doing as well in international competitions as we had been doing in earlier decades. And so with this push for accountability from the public and from various levels of government, it led to the spread of state mandated testing. In order to measure what students had or had not learned, all of a sudden states were requiring students to take, standardized, that's the word. So for standardized tests, and so that they could compare one student to another, one school to another, and make sure that the students were learning and that the schools were doing their jobs. This approach of state mandated testing eventually became the No Child Left Behind legislation, and that came out in 2002. And so that was a national piece of legislation. So rather than the states doing it just individually, we came up with this national approach that we would make sure that all schools were teaching what they were supposed to and were accountable. This had problems and drawbacks. You can read about some of them in the book, but it eventually was changed to the ESSA, Every Student Succeeds Act. This was just implemented a couple of years ago in the 2017-2018 school year. It attempted to correct some of the deficits and deficiencies of the No Child Left Behind Act. So the statewide standardized testing laws have changed somewhat with the new act, as well as how we track student success. We haven't gotten rid of mandated statewide testing, but it has certainly been changed and softened up somewhat, so that it's not quite as stressful as it used to be for students and teachers. You can also read about Common Core. This came out in 2009, and this was another approach to, once again, to hold schools accountable, to kind of present them with a criteria that students should be learning, or what students should be learning at each grade level. A lot of states had problems with the Common Core idea, feeling that what's important to learn in one state isn't necessarily the same thing that's important to learn in another state, and that states should have the power to decide their individual curriculums. So states, this Common Core is not a national law that affects all states. States can opt in or out of the Common Core initiative. So it's known as an initiative. And okay, but there are, once again, the idea is good. Let's kind of provide a blueprint of what students should learn at each grade. But once again, there's some problems in how it gets implemented, how it's been implemented. Okay, I'm going to go on here. Socioeconomic status, ethnicity, culture. Students from low-income ethnic minority backgrounds have more difficulties in school and are not overcoming barriers to achievement. We'll look at some of the reasons coming up. Also, U.S. students have lower achievement in math and science than a number of other countries. We'll take a look at that as well. Over the next couple of slides, we'll look at these two topics. First of all, education of students from low-income backgrounds. They do face more barriers to learning, and here's a list of some of them. Schools in low-income areas tend to have more students with low achievement test scores. Well, this is not necessarily surprising that these low-income areas do have lower scoring students, particularly because, possibly also because the schools tend to be lower standard. Okay. They tend to have lower graduation rates in schools. Smaller percentage of students end up going to college. They have younger teachers with less experience. These harder to teach students are kind of getting the bottom of the barrel. I shouldn't say bottom barrel, but they're getting fresh and new teachers rather than experienced and ones that have a history of quality. They also, as it says here, they also have fewer resources, include decent buildings. One of the things they find about the teaching in these lower income schools is that the teaching is much more likely to encourage rote learning. This is common among young teachers with less experience, and is that they're basically giving these students things to memorize, and their memorization is used more than any other technique. So they're not really employing constructivist approaches or advanced learning approaches, but really just giving facts and for students to learn and remember. And research has shown that this is done more in these low-income schools than in higher or middle SES neighborhoods. As far as there being fewer resources, including decent buildings, the schools that are in low-income areas tend to receive less participation, facilitation, and help from the federal and the state governments compared to higher income schools. So again, less facilitation, less help from both the federal and the state governments. They have less money coming into these poor schools, and so they're the schools that probably need the improvement the most, and yet they tend to, and they do get less funds going their way. maybe we need to put a little bit more money into the low income schools and to try to raise the whole area. I mean, if the school system is better, a low income area will have have a brighter future. They'll have something to look up to. They will pull in um, um, people, families with children. If the school system's good, they'll pull in more middle SES or higher SES families into the area. So you could kind of transform a low income area by starting with the education system, putting more money into it, getting more experienced teachers, trying to make it a more higher quality education system. And this can actually, once again, transform the whole low income area, and where you bring in families that have more money, and the whole area starts to get more tax, a higher tax base. And it is one strategy that people have suggested. But unfortunately, the way it does work is that if you're in a low income area, the schools get less money than schools in other areas. Um, okay, that's enough there. A couple more slides to finish off here. Cross cultural comparisons. Um, I mentioned it earlier that in the U.S. We started to kind of slip in our national rankings. This one's not so bad. The one I'm listing here. I mean, I've seen worse, but I want to put this in perspective that there was a time where we just were number one on these tests. If you go back enough decades, we were considered to have the top students in the world. And now, this is like an above average result lately. This 2015 one, where we scored 11th in fourth grade math, 8th in fourth grade science. Certain other results for other grades, particularly higher grades, I've seen that we're closer to average for all the countries. So average would about be around number 24 or 25 out of 48 countries. And if you look at the grade 8 or the grade 12 results, we kind of slip down there, and in some cases we're below average for our worldwide ranking. We are a rich and powerful country. Once again, we have great schools, but overall we are not performing as highly on these tests as some people believe that we should be. So comparisons have been made. Why is it that our rankings are somewhat lower, and many Eastern Asian countries have really taken over the top rankings? It's not uncommon to find 4 out of the 5 top countries coming from the East Asian region. The countries like China, Japan, Taiwan, and others often are right near the top of the rankings. Korea, I don't know if I mentioned them. Okay. Anyways, so they've done some comparisons. They find that Asian teachers spend more time teaching math than American teachers, and this starts very early. Actually, they find that the differences in the amount of mathematics teaching starts, already in kindergarten and grade 1. They spend more time teaching math than they do in the U.S., and they think this is one of the reasons that they end up performing so well in the math and science tests later on. They spend more time in school than American children. Asian students, on average, go to school for 240 days per year. 240. U.S. students, on average, 178. So 240 versus 178, difference of 62 days. So Asian students are in school 62 extra days. It's over 2 months extra, straight. I mean, so they don't get the same kind of holidays and summer breaks, and many times there are students that are attending schools on Saturdays, and so the importance of school is emphasized more in these Asian countries compared to the U.S. Once again, remember, we are a individualistic country. we like things like leisure and personal freedoms, and we're not the type of country that's going to push our children to do 2 extra months of school, or to go in on Saturdays for school. We value our leisure time and our freedoms, and so we don't have the same mindset, and so it's natural that we are going to slip somewhat in the rankings compared to some of these Asian countries. Um, well, Singapore is another one of the countries I forgot to mention. Anyways, one thing else that's different that we find different is this concept of mindset. It's an interesting idea, and this comes from Carol Dweck, D-W-E-C-K. D-W-E-C-K is her last name, Carol Dweck. She came up with this concept of mindset, and I think it's an important concept. She talks about two different types of mindsets: fixed versus growth. The Having a fixed mindset is a belief that your qualities and your characteristics and skills and traits are that they're carved in stone and they cannot change. So it's kind of like I was born a certain way and I'll always be that way. Or, like, I've never been good at mathematics, I never will be, for instance. And this is known as a fixed mindset, that your brain is a certain way and will not change. Those with a growth mindset have a firm belief that their qualities or their skills or that they can change and improve with effort. So it's more of a belief in plasticity of the brain when you have a growth mindset. And so with that belief, you would say that, I may not be good at math, but if I really keep working at it, I will get better at it. And obviously, when children and when students have a growth mindset, they're more likely to put effort in, believing that they'll see a change in the end. If you have a fixed mindset, you may believe that any effort you put in into that area is just wasted because you cannot improve. You were born with a bad brain in that particular area. And when we do a cross-cultural comparison, as was done in this study, you can see that there's a difference between Japan, Taiwan versus the US. And this was looking at, they surveyed mothers about what they felt was responsible for their children's mathematics achievement, and whether it was more effort on their children's part, or was it natural ability. Now, a belief in natural ability is like more of a fixed mindset. Are you just born with skill or you're not? A belief in effort is more of a growth mindset. So you can see that certainly Japan and Taiwan were both more like, the mothers were both more likely, in both those countries were more likely to believe in effort as a reason for their children's achievement over ability. Whereas in the United States, we were somewhat more even between the two, and certainly not, we didn't have the same percentage of mothers believing in effort over ability. It may not look like these ratings are all that much different, but they were significantly different. And so this is one other thing that could cause a difference in our students is what the parents expect from them. If you believe that your son or daughter just wasn't born good at something, and you believe in natural abilities over effort, then you're not going to push them to do those things. You're not going to expect anything from them. It's like for the longest time, parents never expected their daughters to go to become mathematicians or scientists, and look what happened. They did not become mathematicians or scientists. Not because they didn't have the ability, it was because it wasn't expected of them. Because people believed at that time that females were not born with the same natural abilities in those areas. So it translates eventually to expectations and to what people will push you to do, and what they expect you to do. Anyways, That's enough. I'm rambling on now. So everyone, that is the end of chapter 8. And I will stop this video in one moment. There it is.